Can a 7-time world champion change the fate of a cursed team? Or is he trapped in a red nightmare from which he cannot awaken? What Lewis Hamilton said after the Singapore GP has shaken Formula One. What is happening inside Ferrari? And why could the end of the season be disastrous? Singapore 2025. The heat of the tropical night suffocates even the most experienced griller. The circuit lights shine like artificial stars, illuminating a route that mercilessly punishes technical and human errors. And among that neon glow, where each corner can seal a victory or condemn a championship, Ferrari is once again the protagonist, for the wrong reasons. In the midst of that atmosphere full of tension, fighting against fatigue, the elements and mechanical uncertainty, Lewis Hamilton, the 7-time world champion, couldn't take it anymore. After getting out of his SF25, exhausted, frustrated, he uttered a phrase that needs no interpretation. The end of the season is going to be complicated at Ferrari. He said it with the calm of someone who has learned to control his tone, but with the edge of someone who has experienced success and recognizes failure when it is in front of him. It wasn't an emotional outburst. It was a surgical diagnosis straight to the heart of the problem. Ferrari is not up to the task. This statement was not a simple post-race vent. It is an alarm signal that echoes throughout the paddock. Because when Hamilton speaks, the world listens. And when he does it from genuine pain for a team that, in his own words, gives everything every weekend, the message goes beyond the results on the track. Here we are not just talking about lap times, lost positions, or points that slip away. We are talking about an entire structure, a team philosophy, that seems stuck in a loop of errors, renewed hopes, and repeated disappointments. And if the man whom many consider the best driver in history says that he sees no clear way out, then we are facing something much more serious than a bad race. At this point, the question is no longer whether Ferrari can compete for the title. The real question is whether Ferrari can survive itself without completely breaking one of the most successful drivers to ever come through Formula One. Because this is not just the testimony of a frustrated pilot. It is the beginning of a story that could redefine the relationship between a living legend and the most emblematic team in world motorsport. And perhaps, mark the beginning of the end of an illusion that millions believed possible. Seeing Hamilton return lost glory to Ferrari. Lewis Hamilton is a driver who has known how to control his impulses, measure his words, and maintain diplomacy even in the most tense moments of his career. But after the 2025 Singapore Grand Prix, his speech changed alarmingly. He was no longer the political, patient, calculating Hamilton. It was an honest, raw Hamilton, visibly hit by the reality he is experiencing inside Ferrari. The post-race statements were devastating. Not only because they reflect frustration, but because they portray a feeling of helplessness in the face of a structural problem that seems to have no solution in the short term. When Hamilton says he feels pain for everyone within the team, from the catering area to the mechanics and engineers, it is not an empty phrase. It is a way of recognizing that the human effort within Ferrari is not being enough to compensate for a deeply defective car. That, by itself, would be worrying. But what came next transformed everything into an internal bomb for Maranello. Hamilton stated, unambiguously, that the SF25 is not at the level of the leading single-seaters. And he added a phrase that resonated like a knife. At Mercedes, they would never have made a basic mistake like this. With that direct comparison, Hamilton didn't just identify a technical problem. What it did was expose a cultural difference between two opposing philosophies. The German precision of Mercedes against the organizational chaos that seems to continue to contaminate Ferrari. It is no coincidence that this criticism comes from someone who knows both worlds in depth. Speak with the authority of someone who has won world championships in an environment where every detail is millimetrically optimized, and who now finds himself fighting with a car that literally puts his safety on the track at risk. Because in Singapore, the problem was not just one of pace or setup. Hamilton lost 44 seconds in just 2 laps due to catastrophic brake failure. His radio messages, "I'm losing my brakes, mate. I've lost my left front," reflect an extreme, dangerous situation that should not occur in a team of Ferrari's level. And it was not an isolated case. Charles Leclerc, his teammate, confirmed that from lap 8 he had to do extreme lift and coast simply to keep the temperatures under control. Braking 200 meters before the optimal point in each curve is not racing. It's surviving. Hamilton's pain isn't just born of competitive frustration. It is born from the contrast between what was promised and what is being experienced. This project with Ferrari was sold as a historic opportunity to unite one of the most successful drivers with the most legendary team. But what he found is not a championship team on pause. It is an organization trapped in its own limitations, with a car that seems more like a machine of disappointment than a tool of victories. The most disturbing thing is that his criticism was not destructive. It was diagnostic. As someone who has already walked this path and knows exactly what is not working, his words were a mixture of respect for the work of the human team and hopelessness in the face of a technical and organizational structure that does not respond. That is much more worrying than a simple complaint. It's an alert. Hamilton is not complaining because he lost a race. He regrets because he sees from within that the problem is deeper. That it is not a bad setup, but rather an entire philosophy that needs to be rethought. And if he, who came to Ferrari with the hope of closing his career at the top, is already starting to talk about a complicated ending, then the real challenge is not in the points, but in saving a relationship that threatens to fracture long before the end of the season. The root of the problems that Ferrari is experiencing in 2025 has a first and last name: SF25. A car that has not been up to par since the moment it first hit the track. The season had not yet officially started when worrying comments were already leaking from within Maranello. Engineers, analysts, and team personnel said it clearly: the car was born wrong. But what exactly does it mean for a car to be poorly made? This is not an emotional metaphor. It is a technical statement that describes a car whose basic concept is defective. That is, the problem is not a poorly calibrated spoiler or a suspension that needs readjustment. It's in the DNA of the car. In its aerodynamic philosophy, its mass distribution, the way its elements interact under load. And that is infinitely more difficult to correct. SF25 has several visible symptoms. The first is its instability at the rear, a problem that has manifested itself both in qualifying and in the race. It is an extremely nervous car when entering corners, forcing drivers to modify their driving style lap after lap. On high-demand circuits like Singapore or Australia, this not only compromises performance, but also multiplies mental and physical exhaustion. Every curve is a challenge, not an opportunity. Another critical point is its thermal management. The brake problems experienced by Hamilton and Leclerc were not isolated accidents. They are the result of a poorly designed cooling system, unable to maintain optimal temperature under racing conditions. In simple words, the car cannot run at the limit without self-destructing. The intensive use of lift and coast is not a tactic. It is a necessity to prevent the brakes from collapsing. And in Formula One, if you can't brake late, you can't defend yourself. And if you can't defend yourself, you can't compete. But the most alarming thing is not the individual failures. It is the accumulation. When a car has problems with balance, brakes, traction, aerodynamic efficiency, we are faced with a design that has failed in its overall vision. Not only does the SF25 not suit circuits, does not suit pilots, not even elite drivers like Hamilton or Leclerc, who have amply demonstrated their ability to adapt to different car styles. The real tragedy for Ferrari is not in the lap times or the championship results. It's in your internal culture. Because the most serious problem facing Maranello in 2025 is not SF25. Ferrari is at war with itself. From the outside, it may look like a legendary team looking for redemption, a sleeping giant who just needs to find the missing piece. But from within, what is experienced is a constant struggle between egos, conflicting philosophies, visions that do not align. And that, in a sport where total coordination is essential, is a competitive death sentence. This is the real dilemma. Can a team change its identity when that identity is part of its myth? Ferrari has always been passion, drama, living history of motorsports. But that doesn't win championships. What wins championships is Mercedes' surgical coldness, Red Bull's brutal execution, McLaren's meticulous precision, and Ferrari, for now, is caught between what it was and what it wants to be again. Hamilton is experiencing it firsthand. He arrived in Maranello looking to close his career with a historical epic. But what he's encountering is an internal battle that threatens to devour him. It's not just a fight against McLaren or Mercedes. It is a fight against a machinery that does not finish working. And when a legend like him begins to lose faith, the problem is no longer a sporting one. It is existential. In a sport where thousands define the destiny of a season, the words of a driver can also set the course of a team. And when that driver is Lewis Hamilton, every sentence weighs like a ton of history. After Singapore, there is no longer any room for doubts or excuses. When Hamilton says that the end of the season will be difficult for Ferrari, it is not a prediction. It's a warning. A clear sign that the 2025 project is not responding to the promises made, neither technically nor emotionally. The problem is no longer the performance of the car. It is the invisible fracture that begins to grow between what was dreamed and what is really being experienced inside the Maranello box. Ferrari faces an extreme scenario. With a car that suffers from birth defects, a team divided between conflicting philosophies, and two drivers who begin to rotate in different orbits, each Grand Prix that comes is not just an opportunity to score points. It is a battle to maintain the stability of the entire project. Then the question arises that no one in Maranello wants to ask. What if Hamilton gets tired early? What if this is not a project under construction, but a strategic error that not even he can correct?